All right, hey, football fans, welcome. This is Charles E. Smith Jr., and this is another edition of Football Talk. In just a moment here, I'll be joined by my partner, Chris Lardieri. We'll talk about this fantastic week of football we had. And you know what? Let's go ahead and bring him in right now. You know him. Every week you're reading his columns there on footballnation.com. Excuse me. Chris, go ahead. Bring it in. What's happening, man?
Charles, how are you? I can't believe we're at week 8 of the season. In the blink of an eye, we are nearly at the halfway mark. It's going fast, and I'm enjoying it, and I know a lot of our viewers definitely are, and hopefully it gets better. I didn't think it was possible, but I mean, we really had some great games. Nothing to complain about this year.
Yeah, definitely. So let's get the latest goings on there. Chris Lardieri, footballnation.com. Also, you can follow him on Twitter at Chris L Sports. And let's talk to me. What's the latest out there?
This week in my FN Follies column, which is released either Tuesday evening or Wednesday morning, take more of a humorous look of the goings-on each week in the NFL. This week's column's titled, Ahmad Bradshaw is One Angry New York Giant. And not quite sure what he was thinking, if he had a little too much coffee with his Wheaties on Sunday morning, but took a swing at Victor Cruz's helmet because he missed a block on a particular run, and then coming back on the field, got into it with Tom Coughlin, demanding that he run the ball more, bringing back memories of Brandon Jacobs or even Keyshawn Throw Me the Damn Ball Johnson when he shared a stadium when he was with the Jets. Mm-hmm. So not quite sure what he's thinking there, but what I do tell Ahmad is a word of caution. The Giants are one of these organizations. They're not too fond of that. They're not too much for the me first. You know, I want more of this or that. Just ask Tiki Barber. Just ask Jeremy Shockey. Just ask Jacobs. The list goes on over the years. So hopefully he just had a bad day. I know he had gotten something like 57 carries the previous 2 games. Did a great job. But you know what? Bottom line is wins and losses, Ahmad.
Yeah, well, you know, I would say that Ahmad Bradshaw was the one. If there was a real question mark with the Giants was coming in this year, what was he going to do as really the featured back as being the guy? Because it had always been Jacobs until Jacobs went south and decided that he was no longer a north-south runner and thought he was going to juke east and west and started averaging 1.5 yards a carry. And then, Bradshaw kind of took over. But now he is going to be the guy. No matter who else they bring in to support him, it's really going to be about Bradshaw, and that New York Giants running game is going to be about Bradshaw. And as Bradshaw goes, so goes that running game.
Definitely, and I know Andre Brown played well in his absence, and David Wilson's shown some nice flashes. He's still, got to get out of Coughlin's fumbling doghouse, but he is the man. So I mean, there are going to be weeks where they may need to throw the ball or that they can't really run. So he should be pretty happy right now. It's not like there's a lot of threats to what's going on there in the backfield situation. If anything, Bradshaw's been his own worst enemy in terms of injuries. So he's healthy now. He really throwing these 2 tantrums. Not a wise thing to do for your sort of a career-enhancing move for Bradshaw. But it seems like all is well in Giant land as long as they're winning. Now they go on a losing streak. We could have a repeat of what's going on across the river in the Bronx, where everyone's at each other's throats.
Yeah, that's true. So, and I think, Bradshaw, too, maybe a little bit of the pressure and also maybe amping himself up a little bit more, being the guy. But I like to see the fire and enthusiasm. You just hope it doesn't go over the edge. And you talk about Victor Cruz, who, what can you say? That was a great game, a typical NFC East battle. And then Victor Cruz on the big TD pass from Eli Manning to seal it up right down the stretch.
Yeah, I think we learned 2 things about Victor Cruz this week. One, last year wasn't a fluke. He's not going to have his sophomore jinx. And 2, with each passing week, I think he's working himself into a contract extension, which is nice to see in professional sports nowadays. Guy comes out of nowhere, has a great year, doesn't just live on his laurels and make lots of commercials. He works even harder. So after really that first game of the year against Dallas where he had a case of the drops, he's been stellar all season. So it's a nice story, whether you're a Giants fan or not. You always want to see the underdog like that do well.
Okay, and they got a game against the Cowboys this week. We'll talk about that and more. But let's go ahead and move on to other NFL news. And one is the two of the struggling franchises, the eternally struggling Cleveland Browns, and then also this past week the much struggling Carolina Panthers wound up replacing their GMs, firing the GM. So what do you see in those two cities?
You know, I'm not surprised with Cleveland with the new owner coming in. I mean, if I were to pay that much for a struggling franchise, I think I'd want my own guy in there. And they, Holmgren, some immediately retired, quote unquote, and they brought in Banner, who's had a nice track record in the NFL. So things are going to change in Cleveland. At the end of the year, you'll see a new coach in there. With Carolina, kind of a head scratcher there because Marty Hurley was the GM who had drafted Newton. So are you saying you now don't like what Cam Newton's doing on the field and the GM's the fall guy, or is it just that he hasn't put enough pieces around the team? The defense has been struggling, kind of some questionable contract moves with signing D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart, who may be over the hill.
Yeah.
Hard to say, but one thing I learned about Hurley this week, I was watching PTI, and Michael Wilbon said he was a former Washington, D.C. sports writer who had kind of made it to the big time and got into the executive side of the business. So I did not know that. A little interesting tidbit there. So you can always go back to sports writing, I guess.
There you go. Okay, and then let's talk about a couple other games and someone we had been down on a little bit here. We had talked about him in the season as he got off to a slow start. So as we do, we always give their props, when they do well. So Chris Johnson, how about it? 91 yards against the Steelers, and then this past week, 195 yards against the Bills. So the last 4 games, 451 rushing yards, averaging 5.9 yards a carry and 2 TDs. So you'd have to wonder, is CJ2K back?
I think so. And, on a side note, I'm kicking myself for not trying to trade for him in my fantasy football league when he had little or no value. But I digress. I think he is back. I don't know if it's a fact that with Hasselbeck, an experienced veteran quarterback back there, that maybe he's keeping defenses honest, so they can't just key on the run. Nothing against Jake Locker, but not an NFL veteran like Hasselbeck has been. Could be a function of that. Could be, quite frankly, maybe he just got motivated from hearing that he was over the hill. Sometimes guys need a fire lit like that under him. So nice to see him come back. I guess we wrote him off 3 weeks too soon.
Yeah, so Johnson's back, and fortunately he looks like he's hitting stride as his team, did not play themselves completely out of the playoff race. So if they play well in the second half of the season, they can still definitely be factoring in down the stretch here.
Definitely, especially in the AFC South, which is Houston and everybody else. I mean, you can beat up on the Jaguars and the Colts of the world to pad your record and possibly get a wild card berth.
All right, so let's move on to the Monday night game, the big matchup we talked about. The Chicago Bears at home facing the Detroit Lions. A lot of history there. Matt Stafford playing, and also Jay Cutler. He has a little bit of history with Domicong Suh. Suh got fined last year for the way that he took him out, and Cutler takes a big sack again from Suh this year, which Suh will not get fined. But if you look at it, may have been a little bit borderline. But hey, this is a man's game here. But what I liked was the fact that Cutler got himself up off the turf and got back in the game. He didn't just tap out this time.
Definitely, and not only that, he didn't throw any of his teammates or coaches under the bus. So, Jay, you get a smiley face and a star for your effort this week. And, Suh was kind of doing a little bit of his WWE impression there. Like you said, probably won't get fined, but he's just really kind of earned that label where everyone's just thinking now he's a dirty player no matter what he does. But good for Cutler. It was kind of an ugly effort, but considering it was either that or watching the final presidential debate, I'll take some lack of offense in my NFL over two politicians going back and forth on foreign policy issues.
Yeah, and what about the other side of the ball? I mean, Matt Stafford and couldn't, there we see him being pursued by Julius Peppers, which was the case most of the night. The offense just cannot seem to get anything going, untimely fumbles. It just seems to me when you look at this, I see a team with a lack of discipline. And not just because they took turns on the police blotter in the offseason, but when it translates over onto the field, I just see, a lack of discipline on the team, and at some point, people have got to look at the man in charge and look Jim Schwartz in the eye and ask if he's really the guy, even though he was there as they improved from, winless, 2 wins, 6 wins, 10 wins last year, I believe it was. But, hey, something's going on there in Detroit.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I know Schwartz got an extension earlier this year, but in this era of the NFL, the coach is always the fall guy made expendable, so they better turn things around. And one other thing I've noticed about the Lions, Calvin Johnson has had a very un-Calvin Johnson-like season. Teams are clearly keying on him, with Nate Burleson being done for the year on the other side with a broken leg. They're really going to key on him even more. The most important thing is the Lions really have no running game whatsoever this year. Kevin Smith's a non-factor. They've had a revolving door of other backs in there. And with Javid Best still hurt, it just seems like this is a team that is pass first, and everyone knows it, and they're going to – the other opposing defense are just going to dare them to beat you through the air. And come hell or high water, is it going to be by a throw to Calvin Johnson?
All right. Let's talk about another team when you talk about beating them through the air. They're running at 2-4 right now, but the New Orleans Saints. Now, we got to talk about this here. And people talk about them getting, can they get back in it? And they talk about Drew Brees, the offense. Now, they just gave up 420 yards through the air to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We're talking Josh Freeman. It's one thing to give up 420 yards through the air to a star quarterback, but Josh Freeman rolling up 420 yards through the air against the Saints. They're now 29th against the pass in yards allowed. They're 31st against the rush. So they got to get some things fixed there. Maybe they can have the bounty program reinstated.
Possibly, yeah. We'll have to see if Spagnuolo's involved in any way. But there's a guy right there who might want to be renting and not buying down in the Big Easy. I'm not sure if the Saints were distracted by the hideous Tampa Bay throwback creamsicle jerseys, as I refer to them in my column this week, or what. But were it not for Mike Williams being pushed out of the end zone late in the game last week and a touchdown being negated, the Buccaneers could have easily tied that game up and could have definitely taken them in overtime with the way they were going. Earlier in the game, Vincent Jackson had a huge game, was injured, and one of the Saints defensive backs able to catch up with him, or he would have been gone. They're just getting lit up, so I don't think that is going to bode too well for them going up to Denver this week.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you think? Shall we go ahead and roll that into our Picks of the Week segment, or what have you got to wrap up last week's games?
Other than that, the other thing that kind of stood out to me is, while I did think the Texans would beat the Ravens, the Ravens just didn't even show up.
Right.
I had no expectations it would be that one-sided. Ray Rice couldn't get going. Flacco looked perplexed. The Texans either looked like the good old Texans, or the Ravens were really that bad, and they're really showing some signs of having holes on defense. So the AFC North could be a little more competitive than we thought it was previously going to be.
Exactly, and then with the Steelers, winning this week, getting up there into the mix. And, one other thing that we got to look at is with Joe Flacco finally kind of seeming to get over the hump last season, and now, all of a sudden, this season, things are going okay, and now there's going to be a little bit a little bit more pressure on that offense. So a little bit more pressure going on Joe Flacco, as they're going to have to really try to, control the ball, get more points up on the board, because their defense is not going to be able to bail them out quite like they had been. So a little bit more pressure on Flacco, on Ray Rice, and if Flacco's going to be the man, he's going to have this season to prove it, definitely.
Yep, this will be an interesting second half of the season for Flacco, to see what kind of quarterback he ultimately wants to be.
All right, well, you know what, let's go ahead and roll into the Picks of the Week segment. Now, after standings after Week 7, I tried to catch you with a strong week. I went 6-1, but lo and behold, Chris is rounding into mid-season forms. Well, he went 6-1 also. I'm 23-17 on the year. You're 25-15 on the year. You still got that 2-game cushion. And both of us, let's just mention this, both of us would have gone 7-0 were we not really trying to show our football knowledge and pick some supreme upsets. I picked the Seahawks over the 49ers. You picked the Bengals over the Steelers. Hey, but I have to say, that Seahawks 49ers game hurt. That really hurt because the Seahawks could have put them away in the first half, really, and just some untimely drops, just flat-out drops by some of their receivers.
Yeah, definitely. I felt like the 49ers either thought they had a 21-point lead or just wanted the game to get over with already, and the Seahawks couldn't capitalize. And as for the Bengals, about midway through the third quarter, I realized how foolish my pick was. I was trying to be reasonable and think, you know what, the Bengals are on national TV, they're at home, the Steelers are kind of wobbly, and then the same old Bengals showed up. So I learned my lesson. I also was in Vegas this weekend and naturally didn't heed any of my picks, so I made no money, but on the flip side, I lost no money. So way to go, Chris.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and talk about some of the games this week. Of course, again, we picked the 7 of the better games. If anyone's team is not in there and they think they should, sorry you got dissed, but that's just kind of the way it played out. Let's talk about RG3. RG3 going into Pittsburgh to face that vaunted front 7 of the Steelers. This looks like, no matter win, lose, or draw, this one looks like it's got excitement written all over it.
Definitely. After watching the Redskins play the Giants last week on the road and really should have had a victory locked up, but they just happened to leave a minute and 32 too much on the clock for Eli and company. I could easily see the Redskins going in here and pulling it off. That being said, I think the Steelers have got some momentum after a nice road win. Big Ben seems to have settled in with the offense, even though Mike Wallace has had a case of the drops. But I can see the Steelers winning this one, but like you said, a close game.
Okay, and hey, you know how I feel about the Steelers. That's it. They're one of the teams I picked to possibly go to the Super Bowl out of the AFC. And when I look at this, I don't think that the Redskins are at the point now. And plus, their defense is really porous when it comes down to it. They're not great against the pass, and the Steelers with those speedy wideouts they have, even though they're not having Big Ben throw deep quite as much, but still with Antonio Brown and Mike Wallace on the outside there, I think a little bit too much for that Redskins defense. They'll be able to stretch the D, leave them a little thin, and hopefully if their number 1 or 2 or hopefully number 3 running back is healthy, there'll be some holes to run through up front. But it's going to be a lot closer than I think it normally would be. The Steelers still fighting through those injuries, but what I like what they're doing is they just say, we still have to go out and win ball games. And no matter if we're injured or not, whether you're first string, second string, or third string, when you go out there, you're out there to win. That's what I like, the attitude that filters through that Steelers organization.
That's right, guts, a little black and blue, but going to fight through anything.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go to the next game here. Seattle Seahawks at 4-3. Detroit Lions at 2-4, and the lights getting dim there in Detroit. What do you think?
You know, normally I would pick the Lions at home, but with just the fact that they're in such disarray on both sides of the ball, and that the Seahawks, even though they're on the road, it will be a dome game. I'm going to pick the Seahawks. I think they're going to hang around all year. They're really tough at home, but I think they're going to get a key road victory this week. You'll see that Seahawk defense again. That's really what's keeping them in games. And Russell Wilson won't make mistakes to cost his team a game. Maybe boring, maybe close, but Seattle wins it.
Yeah, I think so too. And Seattle showed me something in that Niners game. What I liked was, even though they lost the game, sometimes the real character shows through of the team. And with the Seahawks, what you saw is a team that's not quite there yet, but they know what they're capable of doing. And I think going in there against a Detroit Lions team, which is really anything but confident at this time, I got to go with Seattle also to march into Detroit. Seattle winds up 5-3. The Lions go to 2-5, and there's going to be crying and grumbling in Detroit. In Motown, it's going to get ugly.
And it's going to get even uglier if the Tigers lose the World Series, and then they'll start their focus on the Jim Schwartz countdown and blaming Ndamukong Suh for the team's failures. It could get pretty ugly. I agree.
Okay, now the Dolphins coming off the bye week. Dolphins at 3-3. Jets just had their hearts broken against the Patriots this past weekend. AFC East matchup. You never know how those games are going to go. The Dolphins, though, playing some good ball. Jets trying to really stay afloat. How do you see this one playing out?
I'm going to pick the Dolphins. The Dolphins really should have won that first game. Tannehill was kind of a little wobbly still, but they really had some chances to win. Carpenter missing 2 field goals didn't help. And on top of that, I think the development of Ryan Tannehill has been one of kind of the unsung stories this year. They'll get the ground game going with Reggie Bush. They've got a nice underrated defense, too. And even though the Jets played well, I mean, Rex has a history of really kind of motivating the troops whenever he goes up against Belichick's Patriots. Still, even though Sanchez had a nice game, it came out he and even Longoria broke up, which is bad news for him, but good news for the rest of the single men of the world. Maybe that motivated him this week, but from what I can tell, he hasn't been dumped. So I'm going to go Dolphins this week.
Okay. And, not just because I've been a Dolphins fan since the days of Bob Greasy, but for really all the reasons that you mentioned. If it's not for Carpenter hacking and shanking there early in the season, really the Dolphins, they'd be 5-1 at this point, save that really ugly game against the Texans they opened up with. But, I got to go Dolphins in this game. I think they're playing well, coming off the bye week. Reggie Bush also hadn't run that well in the last couple of games, nursing a little bit of a sore knee. That should be healed. He should be 100%. And I think you're going to see the Dolphins hitting on all 8 cylinders. I'm going with the Dolphins in this game, too.
I like it. More agreement on our part.
Okay. Now we possibly get to a disagreement. The Falcons, last undefeated team at 6-0 at the Eagles. We know how vulnerable the Falcons have looked these last couple of games, even though they squeaked out a couple of wins. But Falcons at the Eagles, Eagles desperate, Falcons struggling a little bit. This one could have upset special written all over it. Talk to me.
Unfortunately, I'm getting sucked in, Charles. You pulled me in. I'm going with the upset. There are 2 reasons. Number one, I'm very superstitious, and hearing how Andy Reid is, I believe, 13-0 now, coming off a bye week, and considering this might be his very last season in Philadelphia, he's going to run the table. He's going to win his last game coming off a bye week as an Eagle coach, potentially. And also, hand in hand with that, the fact that they've fired Castillo, the defensive coordinator. Maybe that'll rally the troops there on the defensive side of the ball. And most importantly, the Falcons really should have gone down a few times this year. The Raiders really had their chances, but hey, they're the Raiders. That happens. The Redskins really hung in with them before the Falcons ultimately put them away. And I think this is the week they're ripe to be upset. Maybe Vic, in the week off, held on to the football when he was in bed or walking around the house all week, and he holds on to the ball a few extra times that he normally wouldn't have. So I'll take the Eagles in an upset.
Okay, well, the Falcons definitely do not look like a team that's going to go 16-0. But I will have to say, though, I think Philadelphia is going to, again, put them in the position where you're going to look at Atlanta, they're going to look shaky again. But when it comes down to it, I think they're going to have to execute in the clutch. That's Philadelphia. And really, I don't trust Michael Vick to execute when the game is really on the line. And this one is going to be close. Unless Ryan goes out there and just comes unglued, this should be a close game. Close game, I still like Atlanta to win this. So I'm looking at a close, imperfect game played in Philadelphia, and Atlanta probably winning by 2 or 3 points.
We agree to disagree for once.
Okay, let's move on. One that I'm sure you'll have to try to separate from here, the Giants at 5-2. At Dallas to play the Cowboys at 3-3, an NFC East matchup. We all love these. Talk to me.
Oh, you're backing me into a corner every week with my conflict of interest. Trying to be as objective as possible. The Cowboys are banged up at running back with both DeMarco Murray and Felix Jones. Tony Romo, we don't know which one will show up. Sean Lee, their leading tackler on the defensive side of the ball, is now done for the year. A lot of uncertainty in Big D. They really had a hard time putting away the hapless Panthers last week. And on top of that, the Giants are going to be looking for revenge after losing the home opener this season. And they haven't lost in that building yet, and I think the streak will continue. Giants win.
Okay. And, well, if you just look at the two teams and all the reasons you just mentioned and the way the Giants are playing right now, I mean, hitting on all 8 cylinders, and that was a clutch win they had against the Redskins last week, even though it was tight like division matchups always are. But I think, unfortunately, for the rest of the league, the rest of the NFC in particular, the Giants have hit stride early. Normally, we don't see them start playing like this until, week 17 or the playoffs?
Yeah,
I think they're getting it together.
The
So I like the Giants to go into the stadium there, into Texas, and I think they're going to break the Cowboys' hearts. The Giants come out 6-2, Cowboys come out at 3-4 and shaking their heads and looking for answers and all that other stuff with Jerry Jones down on the sidelines looking forlorn. You know how that goes.
Definitely, and you saying the Giants are hitting stride soon gives me bad flashbacks of 2008 when they were chugging along, and then Plaxico Burress went into a nightclub one night with a gun.
And we all know how that story ended. So let's go ahead and move on. The Saints, who we talked about earlier, the Saints just pitiful defense going into the Broncos, going into Mile High. Saints and Broncos. Saints at 2-4. 2 games that, very easily the Saints are 0-6 here, but they're 2-4. Broncos are 3-3. I would just say this: if you're gambling, bet the over. But how do you see this game?
I think the Broncos win. They're coming off a bye. The Saints have no secondary whatsoever. The Broncos really have some nice momentum going into the bye week with that great come-from-behind victory over the Chargers. And while I could see Breeze easily doing the same thing and lighting up the Broncos defense, they still have a good pass rush. They still got experience in the secondary, and if it does turn out to be a shootout, I think the Broncos can get stops, whereas the Saints can't.
Right, and when you look at them, the Saints are not good against the run or the pass, and then you look at the way McGahee has been running this year with the Broncos. I think the Broncos are playing decent ball. They're not an overwhelming team, not an overpowering team, but they're going to play well enough to beat the Saints. This will be the shootout at Mile High, but I got to go with the Broncos also. Peyton Manning getting in the win column again. Broncos going to 4-3. Saints dropping to 2-5, and we may be reading their eulogy on air next week.
All right, I'll start preparing it.
Okay. And one last game. We got the 49ers. This is an interesting game here. Interesting because we talk about teams that have looked vulnerable in the past few weeks. The Falcons are one. The Niners are another. Niners at 5-2. At Arizona to play the Cardinals, who are 4-3. What do you think?
This is a tough one because originally I probably would have picked the Cardinals with the momentum they had, the way their defense is playing, the way Kevin Kolb had been resurrected. But with the way they looked last week against the Vikings in Minnesota, I don't know if it's the fact that they went back to Skelton and either he's rusty or the offense isn't on the same page. Larry Fitzgerald's really gotten off to a slow start. And the fact that the 49ers have really come off 2 tough games, I don't see Harbaugh having his team kind of throwing a dud for the 3rd week in a row. So I think it'll be close. I think it'll be hard fought, but ultimately I'm going with the 49ers.
Yeah, and this was going to be, I was leaning really close to picking an upset here too with the Cardinals and maybe working some of that early season magic that they had. But yeah, I got to go. I think the Cardinals have come back down to earth after their hot start that they had. Starting out 4-0, and I think they've come back down to earth now. So Jim Harbaugh is really going to want a great performance out of his team after that horrendous performance they put up against Seattle. I think he's going to have them ready to play. They're going to go into the desert, and I like the Niners to come out with a victory here. But I'm going to be looking at how the Cardinals play because something's going to be shown about the heart and soul of that team. And one other game, we're not even going to break it down, but if it's even on the books in Vegas, I don't know if they pull it off or not, but the Packers and Jacksonville, however many points they're giving Jacksonville, just take the Packers and give the points. That's all I can say about that game. We're not even going to pick it because why bother? Jacksonville has Mojo D is out, Blaine Gabbert is injured, and God help them, no running back. And if they have to go to Chad Henne, that is going to be just horrendous.
Yeah, I know my friends that are Raider fans are very happy to see the Jaguars in town last week, even though they got dragged out to overtime. But I agree with you. Unless Aaron Rodgers gets strep throat or didn't pay his discount double check premiums and ends up in jail for the night or something, I agree with you there. Packers should really put this one away.
There we go. So those are our picks for the week from us so-called experts here at Inside Sports. But I do like how we had gone 3-4 the week before this past week, but then we round into mid-season form. You can tell a little bit more about the teams. We both went 6-1 this past week, so Chris and I we watch games the same way. Look at it, evaluate, take the fan part of yourself out of the game, and really look at what the teams are doing. And that's why we roll the way we do, and that's why if you want to know about football and you don't want the hype, the sugar coating, or bandwagoning, or any of that other stuff that you find on other shows, you need to watch this show and not all those others. Would you not say so, Mr. Lardieri?
Absolutely. I am not auditioning for a coaching job like John Gruden, and you are not beholden to the NFL's money because you're an employee of ESPN, Fox, CBS, NBC, etc. We are independent. We're a mom and pop show, but we call them like we see them. And ultimately, yet again this week, we digress on one game, and I will be texting you during the Eagles-Falcons game to see which one determines who wins this week for us. That's our grudge match game of the week.
There we go. All right, and I'll be looking forward to those texts as well. And I put out a little bit on Twitter, but a lot of texting between us. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can follow me at The Inside Sports. Follow Chris on Twitter at Chris L Sports, and remember to read his weekly columns on footballnation.com. So we've actually run a little bit over, so I'll go ahead and say goodbye to everybody. I'm Charles E. Smith Jr., so for Chris Lardieri, let me just say happy Halloween to everyone next week. We're going to have to see what night we're going to do the show next week, because I'm sure that there might be some trick-or-treaters, at least in one of our households, who are going to need to be out trick-or-treating and getting candy at this time that their daddy may or may not steal when they get home. I'm not mentioning any names at all.
Yeah, whoever that is, I think that's a fair assessment, Charles.
All right, everybody. I'm Charles E. Smith Jr. for Chris Lardieri and Inside Sports. This has been Football Talk. We'll see everybody next week. Thanks for watching.